Hey everyone! So I did a poll recently and to ask people if they want me to show a process video for this painting, this lavender feel, or this cloudy feel, and it looks like the lavender feel was the chosen one. So we'll do this one this week, but I wanted to highlight that this week I'm using a smaller piece of paper because I got a new watercolor block from Canson, this one, and this is the first time I've ever used a watercolor block. A block is a watercolor paper pad where there is a glue all the way around on all four sides, holding the papers together, so you can't tear it out like normal, like a pad. And the good thing about this is that I can just paint right on top. I don't have to tape down the paper stays in place, and it really prevents buckling, especially if I do a lot of wet on wet techniques. So it really makes it really convenient for me to just paint without worrying about prepping the paper, taping it down, and it's very easy to take the paper off when you're done. I usually use a palette knife and I stick it into this little corner right here where it's not glued down, and I just run it all the way around the sides and it pops right off, so it's really easy. So this was really cool. So these were the first two paintings I did on the watercolor block, and I really enjoyed it. I really did, and I would highly recommend this if you want to give a watercolor block a try. This is cold press watercolor paper, 140 pounds, and this is a 4x6 size, and it comes in a 15 sheet block. All right, well, yeah, coming up is my process video for this lavender feel. I hope you enjoy. So we're going to start out with drawing our horizon line. This is going to be the line where the rows of lavender stop in the distance. And then I also drew a dot in the middle to help me draw the perspective of the rows of lavender. And as you're drawing the rows, just kind of be planning how many rows of lavender flowers you would like to have on your field, and just kind of draw it accordingly. You don't want too many. You want to make sure you leave a little bit of space in between them for separation of the rows between each other. And then we'll go ahead and erase that point for that helped us with the perspective drawing, and then lightly erase the drawn in rows as well, just very lightly, so it doesn't show through to the end painting. And if it does, that's okay too. Some people like that look. So just lightly take off some of the drawings and make sure you leave enough where you can still see your guides. And then here I am going to draw in very loosely rows of lavender sort of in the background, in the distance. They're very thin, going from slightly upper left towards the middle part of the paper. So it's very thin rows of lavender sort of on the side. It's not part of the main rows that we are looking at, but sort of in the distance. I hope that makes sense. So I'm just lightly putting that in, and also lightly putting in some lines to show me or guide me where my hills are in the distance. So it's not completely flat, but sort of a few, maybe 2 or 3 hills going out into the distance. So we're gonna wet the upper part of our painting so that we can work on the sky. I'm mixing up a very diluted light color, mainly cerulean blue, and a touch of purple, just to make it slightly interesting, and maybe tie in with the purple lavenders on the foreground, just for cohesiveness, and lightly putting in my sky. I am using my round 2 uku brush and dropping in this mixture, picking up my brush, skipping around, so that we have various spots with no color, and that would be kind of, conveying clouds in the sky, so leaving some white space. And if you accidentally put down too much of your color, don't worry, clean off your brush, dry your brush a little bit, keep it moist, and then just use your moist brush to lift up where you don't want your colors. And so that's an easy way to sort of fix your mistake if you ended up putting down too much colors in your sky. And the best thing to do with skies is just to kind of do it and leave it alone and move on. You'll be pleasantly surprised at how well they turn out, if you don't try to control it too much. So we're going to move on to our foreground, more so our distant hills. I have mixed up a light value of a yellowish green. I'm going to lightly, very loosely, with not a lot of care or worry, paint in the hills in the background, in the distance. I'm trying to angle my paper here so that the pigments and the colors would not flow up towards my sky. That's still a little wet. If your sky is too wet and your green is bleeding into the sky, please let your sky dry first before you move on to this next step. And while I'm painting the hills, the furthest hill will be the lightest one, meaning the most diluted shade of green, value of green. And then as you move closer, and you work on the hills that are coming towards you, you want to make it a little darker and a bit more saturated, with a bit more of the green yellowish pigment. And make sure that when you are painting these hills, you are painting from left to right in a horizontal direction. You want to convey that perspective. You want to paint in the direction that your subject is, which is horizontal, left to right or right to left, it doesn't matter, but it is horizontal. So I've mixed together a light value of the purple that I'm going to use. It's very light, so we are using this just to paint the base of the lavender feel. I'm loosely painting in my roads here, so use the guide that you've drawn at the beginning and paint in your roads. It doesn't have to be perfectly within the lines. I encourage you to paint outside of the lines. It doesn't have to be perfect because, the flower fields or the roads are not, or they're going to have lavender flowers poking out in various places. So it's not going to be a straight line. So make sure you follow your guides because it's important to keep perspective here, so that your viewers will know what they're looking at. the base color is still damp, I'm dropping in a slightly darker value of the same purple. To create a darker value, you just add more of the pigment without adding more water. You can drop it in and kind of, once you get to the roads on the left and right side of sort of the middle, you want to concentrate a lot of your pigments sort of at the bottom part of the roads, the part of the roads that meet the ground, because you want to portray a shadow there. So meaning it's darker towards the bottom of the road than it is towards the top where light is hitting it. So keep that in mind as you drop in the darker values. You may have noticed that I sprayed my painting there a little bit. That's because it was getting a bit too dry for my colors to blend together. So you may not need it that step. I do live in the desert, so my paper dries pretty quickly. So as you're working on your lavender roads, it's mainly wet and wet technique here. So making sure that your roads are still at least damp before you drop in colors. You want the blending of the base layer and the colors that you drop in to be soft and for them to blend together without much harsh lines. I'm dropping in a little bit of a pink shade as well for variety and interest. If you would like to do that, you may. You don't have to. You can keep it all purple or different shades of purple, but I wanted to drop in some pink. I thought that would be fun. So we're going to work on the walkways in between the lavender roads. I'm using green and a touch of yellow. I'm loosely painting in the roads, making sure that the part of the road, of the walkway closer to us is slightly bigger in diameter compared to the part of the walkway going away from us into the distance. So keeping this will help keep the perspective that this is a field with walkways going away from us into the distance. I like to use a combination of green and yellow in the walkway for interest and instead of just one color, but if you don't like the yellow, that's completely fine. You can stick with just green. So I'm mixing up a darker shade, darker value of this purple. And I'm going to use this darker value to drop in areas where there are shadows in the roads of lavender. So for the roads on the left and right sides from the middle, you're usually able to see sort of the sides of it, the side of the roads. And so you want to concentrate your darker purple towards the bottom part of the roads where it meets the ground. And then for the middle lavender road, you don't see the left and right side of it. You kind of just see the top. And you can still drop in some of the darker purple values to communicate flowers there. But make sure that you don't cover it all up. You leave a lot of the lighter values showing through. I'm just spraying to keep my paper moist. Like I say, you may not need to do this part if your paper is moist or wet enough. It looks like I might have oversprayed, and that's okay. I know this because my colors are just kind of really blending together there. That's okay. You can always use a clean, moist brush to lift it up lift up where you don't want the colors. And then once that area is somewhat dry, you can drop in the colors that you do want, and that's okay. So nothing is lost here. We can always troubleshoot. And so you just keep using your smaller round brush with a nice pointy tip to drop in this darker value of purple here and there to communicate lavender flowers. Remember to retain some of the lighter values that we have already painted initially. And remember, we're not trying to paint in every single flower or any flowers in details. This is all very expressive or and just impressions of a field of lavender. So don't worry about painting each lavender or each flower or anything like that. And if you would like, you can do some splatters with the purple that you have. Just make sure you cover up your the upper part of your painting so you don't get it in the sky and the hills in the background. But I like to splatter when I want it to be a bit messier than it's looking. I want it to be less structured and more expressive. You don't have to splatter if you don't want to, but I like the look of splatters. I'm also splattering in a little bit of clean water, just a little bit. And what clean water does on a wet paint is it leaves really nice textures, tiny little textures where it lands, and you can kind of see that already forming, but I think it looks really cool. It adds a lot of textures and adds therefore a lot of interest to the rows of flowers. Again, you can skip that too if you're not up for that, but I do encourage you to give it a try. Now, if every time you put down a darker value for the shadows and it just seems to blend out and you lose it right away, it's because your paper is still really wet where you dropped off that darker value. All you have to do is wait for it to dry a little bit more and then carry on with the darker value. And as I'm going in, adding the darker purple, I'm also using that opportunity to make brush stroke marks that just kind of flicks up to make it look like flowers popping up or stems or leaves popping up. So they're not, just globs of paint, but they're intentional strokes to mimic the shape of stems of the lavender flower. And then here I am switching over to my flat foliage brush to help me create more textures in the rows of lavender. I want texture because there's just a lot of flowers there and therefore a lot of textures. And so I thought my foliage brush can really help me be a bit messier and less orderly as I would be with a round brush. If you don't have this brush, you can keep using your round brush, your regular round brush. And then we're going to let this layer dry 100% before we move on to the next step. So I've mixed up a little bit more of the purple, a pretty dark value of it, not a lot of water, so that I can paint in details. And we're painting in the roads of lavender in the distance, and these lavender roads are going sort of horizontally along the horizon line there. And it's small, and I encourage you to use the tip of your round brush and draw in the roads in a horizontal fashion, in a horizontal direction, to give the illusion that that's kind of the direction of where the roads are going, and that really helps kind of set it into the background, keep it small, and keep it in the distance. And so work on that. I wouldn't fuss too much about this part, as long as you have a good sort of layer going where there's a little bit of a light purple, and then using some of the darker purple to draw in some of the lines. I don't think you need any details other than that. And then this stage, I'm using this stage to put in more details and sort of accentuate some of the shadows in my foreground lavender roads. So maybe some of your shadows have washed out a little bit when your paper was wet. Maybe you still have a good dark shadow going and you don't have to add any more, and that's fine. For me, I think it kind of washed out a little bit when my paper was too wet, so I'm going in right now to place those dark values in now that my paper is dry. Alright, so I switched over to using my flat foliage brush for more textures. So I am using this to go in and draw in some of the foliage or some of the flowers and stems sticking up. I want to give a hint of it in the parts of the lavender roads that are going away from us, so you don't want to put too much. And then for the parts that are closer to us, you can add a little bit more, because you should be able to see a little bit more of it since you're standing, it's closer to you. So it makes sense for you to put more foliage and stems and stuff in the areas closer to us, and less as it goes away from us. So you can do this with your round brush if you don't have the foliage brush. And make sure you don't cover up too much of the lighter purple paint layer underneath. Let's leave some of that, so don't cover it too much, don't get carried away. Put down a few strokes and step back and reassess. Alright, so we're going to let the lavender roads dry a little bit before we add any more on top of it. I am currently mixing up a dark, thick green, and we're going to use our thin round brush to go in and add some details to the hills in the distance. I am using the tip of my round brush to paint in sort of at the bottom part of my hills, and this helps give it more it looks a bit more 3D in that, you know, it's not a flat subject. It gives it some shadow, and it helps it separate, or helps me separate one hill from another as well. You can accentuate this even more by adding suggestions of bushes or trees in the distance. Make sure you keep this really, really tiny because it is really far away from us. The further away, the smaller the bush or tree would be. Of course, this is optional. Alright, so I'm using Bleedproof white now, which is not watercolor exactly. It's more like gouache. It's an opaque white. This is called Bleedproof white from Dr. P.H. Martin. To activate it, I just add water and just keep mixing water into the pigment, and it comes alive. And make sure it's a pretty thick layer, because if it's not thick, it can dry a little bit transparent, not as white as I would like for it to be. So make sure you have more pigment than water, for example. So I'm gonna cover up the upper portion of my paper. I'm gonna use my Bleedproof white, and we're gonna do some fun splattering. I'm using my foliage brush, which has relatively harder bristles than my round brush to splatter. So it's kind of like so you can use maybe a toothbrush as well if you would like, or you can use your regular round brush and just tap it onto, another brush or your finger to splatter. Now I'm using my small round brush to paint in some leaves or stems around my splatters if there is a splatter that I don't like. that's fine. I can just paint my dark purple right on top of it, or I can just wipe it away or lift it off with a clean wet brush. And this is more, you know, we're at the stage where you're looking at your painting, see what it's missing. Maybe you're happy with where you're at. Maybe you would like to add more shadows towards the bottom of your roads. This is really up to you, or you can be done. Alright, so let's peel this off of the watercolor block. I'm using my palette knife and I'm just cutting through the glue on 4 sides. It's really easy to do. If you don't have a palette knife, maybe you can use a credit card. Anything flat, make sure it's clean so it doesn't disrupt the paper underneath. Well, I hope you painted along with me. If you didn't, thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. Leave me a comment. All right, see you next time. Bye, guys.